The Sony X95K is Sony's first attempt at mini LED. This is Sony's top of the line mini LED TV besides the 8K Sony Z9K for 2022. If you want a quick review, plot twist, this TV is pretty good. This TV is considered to be one of the most controversial TV. We have some mixed reviews from being good and others being bad. In my review, I'm going to be reviewing the 85-inch version. Any size lower than 85 inch, I haven't reviewed. Now I will start and say that the X95K 85-inch version is better than the QN800B that I reviewed and close at or just below the QN900B that I reviewed earlier this year. Now, before you start clicking off this video, let me run through the reasons as in why I think the X95K is the better TV. The 85-inch version of the X95K is brighter than the QN800B, and I would say it's better in the blooming department. Even with the QN800B being an entry-level 8K TV, the TV just simply doesn't compete with the HDR impact in the out-of-box picture settings. For my review of the QN800B, it had a push of red, which was very evident in my comparison videos. If you want to know what I mean by a push of red when it comes to the colors for the QN800B, I mean a push of red when it comes to the color tones, when it comes to skin, and also when it comes to watching normal content. Now switching to the QN900B, this is where I see the X95K would trade blows with the QN900B. When it comes to detail, I noticed that the X95K falls short compared to the QN900B. However, when it comes to gaming in the picture category, the X95K wins. I will cover more in the gaming department later in this video. Before I cover the picture, let me go over the blooming once again. If you haven't seen my previous video, I made a dedicated blooming video in that department. I suggest go ahead and checking that one out. Now I'm about to go ahead and switch the scene, and I'm going to go ahead and show some logos. So the first thing you're going to see is Ghostbusters Afterlife. So right now you can see that the camera is moving, and I'm going ahead and shifting the camera from all the way to the angle of this video. Now you can see blooming a little bit, but it's very minor. Now shifting to Stranger Things Season 3 Episode 3. There's another good video to show blooming. And now in this area, I do see it just a tad bit, but the only way that I can really see it is if I shift it from one angle or if I go really close to the TV to take a look at it. And this is one thing that I just want to show people who are on the fence when it comes to the X95K. Yeah, I'm talking about specifically the 85-inch version. This is something that I want people to take a look at just to show that what I actually see in person. So one thing that I'm about to show is I'm about to pull up the menu, and this is one thing that's kind of annoying about the X95K. When you pull up the menu, the local dimming, the auto local dimming is disabled for whatever reason. However, once you exit the menu, the local dimming will start to be enabled again. So that's one thing that I can say that is a real negative when it comes to the Sony X95K, but I just want to throw that for people who don't know anything about this and just to be aware of this. So I'm doing another close up as well. So if you look at Stranger Things, this is Elle. If you look at her left shoulder from this view, you can see that slight blooming or that glow on her shoulder. You can see it from even in front and even on the angle side of the TV. But when you stand at a certain distance, I don't notice it that much unless I am really close up to the TV. But this is something that I also want to show to everyone when it comes to the Sony X95K 85-inch version. Once again, I think Sony did a really good job in this area, especially when it comes to the local dimming. Now, as the settings for me, I use auto local dimming set to high. I know it's recommended to use medium, but for my personal preference, I like the local dimming being high. I feel that it does a better job in that area. I understand that when it comes to specular highlights, when it comes to HDR impact, it's a lot better when it comes to the medium settings. But from my view and what I'm looking at here, I think for my personal view, I think the local dimming set to high is perfectly fine. So this is where I'm just showing a little bit of a zoomed in portion of the TV, and this is like where I'm right at the TV. And this is where you kind of can see, or you can see the blooming, but I did this just to show that the Sony X95K did a good job on this one. And this does show on this version that even at this close distance with that minimum blooming, this is what it looks like. But from a distance, you really can't see it that much unless you're really looking for it. Now, if I was comparing this to the Samsung QN800B, this is one thing that I could say that the X95K, the 85-inch version, I think they did a better job when it comes to this blooming department, just simply because how Sony has handled their blooming area. I think when it comes to showing the highlights and even showing the picture, I noticed that on the QN800B that there was a lot of black crush compared to the Sony X95K. If we switch it to the QN900B, that is where it goes blow for blow when it comes to the blooming department. Now, granted, I had the 65-inch version of the 900B, and I know there were a firmware update that's supposed to fix some of the issues that I mentioned before when it comes to the narrow black bars and when it comes to certain areas when it comes to the blacks. But comparing it to the 85-inch X95K, I think when it comes to comparing those two TVs, the 900B, they're pretty much neck and neck, depending on your preference. Now, on the 900B, it did crush when it comes to the shadow detail, where Sony, on the other hand, doesn't crush when it comes to the shadow detail. And so that's something to keep in mind. But by not crushing those shadow details, you will see a elevated black bars where you'll see being absolutely black, but you will see a little bit of a lifted black compared to the QN900B. And a good example of that is when you look at the black bars. When you look at the 16:9 aspect ratio, when it go ahead and compares to the QN900B, that's where you see the absolute black, but you're sacrificing when it comes to shadow detail compared to the X95K on the other hand. You may see those black bars a little bit elevated depending on certain content that you watch, but the majority of the time it is it appears to me that it looks black. The Sony X95K is running the XR processor. When it comes to out of the box settings, picture settings specifically, I see this TV as a clear winner compared to the Samsung QN800B and the QN900B. When it comes to the Samsung TVs, I would have to massage the settings, the picture settings specifically, a bit compared to the X95K. The only settings that I had to switch is to picture custom, and then when you go into the auto local dimming, I set that to high. When it comes into motion, I think with Sony TVs specifically 2021, 2022, pretty much all the Sony models that I have, when it comes to the Sony A90J and when it comes to the Sony A9F, I think the X95K does an excellent job when it comes to motion. I would even say in this department, it would be just as close as the A90J, just simply because A90J you do see stutter when it comes to certain content, but with the X95K, I think it does a little bit better job in that motion category. But that's just my personal opinion. when it comes to the X95K. Now comparing it to the Samsung QN800B and the QN900B, now that's something that I have noticed that the X95K does a better job in that category compared to the Samsung. Now the Samsung has done a decent job, but in my opinion, it doesn't compare to the X95K. Now when it comes to QD OLED, the A95K and the S95B, those TVs without a doubt does a better job when it comes to picture category against the X95K. When it comes to motion wise, the A95K does a better job, and the S95B does a little bit better job than the X95K. But I would say both of them are neck and neck when it comes to that motion category. Those are my thoughts when it comes to the S95B and the A95K. Now, both of those TVs, without a doubt, are the best TVs for 2022. But the reason why I like the X95K, the 85-inch version more specifically, is all it comes down to size. Where the S95B and the A95K, biggest size that they could possibly go with is a 65-inch, and that's something that I just couldn't deal with my use case scenario. So those are one of the things that I like the X95K because it could go all the way up to the 85-inch. So let's talk about the negatives on the X95K. One thing that drives me nuts is when you go to the home menu on the Google OS or the Google TV specifically, the auto local dimming specifically is disabled, and it looks horrendous. And that's one of my biggest negatives, as in I don't know why Sony can't enable auto local dimming when it comes to the home menu. And then also when you pull up the menu when you watching content, for some reason it's also disabled as well, which I already showed an example earlier in this video. Another negative that I find with the Sony X95K, if you're using the Bravia Core app or watch movies on there, the auto local dimming is disabled for whatever reason. So I know that could probably be fixed with a firmware update, but it is annoying if you try to watch some free movies that comes with each Bravia TV. Also, when it comes to not only just the Sony X95K, but it's with all 2021 Sony TVs and 2022 TVs, is the Sonys don't only have two HDMI 2.1, even though those are full bandwidth, but with one of the HDMI inputs being eARC, it may be an issue for some people who are on the fence of buying this TV because you may have to sacrifice one of those inputs for a soundbar. Now, in my use case scenario, I have the Yamaha RX88A, which is capable of having HDMI 2.1, which for all the inputs on that receiver. So I could use that HDMI 3 that is on the Sony X95K, which is the eARC that's connected to that receiver, and I could have all my consoles or all my HDMI 2.1 capable devices hooked up to the receiver, and I'm not going to have an issue with that. But with that, there's an issue when it comes to the settings where you do have to toggle in the Sony TV menu where you have to switch from enhanced Dolby Vision to enhanced VRR. That's another negative that I have with all Sony TVs from 2021 and 2022. I wish they had some type of auto switch compared to that. If you're doing that on a Samsung TV, it's just a simple selection and you never have to worry about it again. Now, switching to the gaming portion of it, one thing I do find as a negative on the X95K, I wish they kind of mirror when it comes to Samsung and when it comes to uh, the LG TVs. I noticed when it comes to those manufacturers, I wish that Sony would copy when it comes to the game bar. But when it comes to picture category wise, the Sony X95K compared to the QN900B, I do prefer the X95K picture quality wise when it comes to gameplay compared to the QN900B. Now the QN900B does a good job, but just like how I mentioned before, you still have to play with the settings when it comes to gaming or watching content. And one thing on the X95K, you have a plethora of settings that you could play with to your liking. And also on the X95K and any Sony LED TVs from 2021 and 2022, Sony has released a firmware update that enables auto local dimming when you play games. And that's something that Samsung still struggles with when it comes to mini LED, because when you play games, you may tend to see some pictures to be washed out, but compared to the Sony X95K, that's something that you can see that it is fully enabled. Now, at the time of this recording, the 85-inch version of the Sony X95K is going for $4,299.99. That's the TV that I purchased at. But if you're curious to know, do I recommend this TV? Absolutely. I think the 85-inch version of the X95K is a amazing TV, and this is a TV that I am going to keep in my basement compared to all the TVs that I reviewed for 2022. As I mentioned before about the A95K and the S95B, the QD OLED TVs, those TVs are simply just not big enough for my use case scenario. And that's one of the reasons why I went ahead and switched to the X95K. Reason why I didn't want to do OLED, on the other hand, I already had the Sony A90J, and I didn't want to go with the LG G2 just simply because I'm looking for that HDR impact when it comes to those specular highlights that I feel that I would get more with the Sony X95K. Now, when it comes to brightness, that's one thing that I haven't mentioned in this video. This TV gets extremely bright, way brighter than the QN800B. And even on or at the same brightness as the QN900B, and I'm talking specifically on the 65-inch version, it is brighter. But when it comes to the larger sizes, those are one things that I haven't compared when it comes to the 85-inch QN900B. But I would say that from looking at the 85-inch X95K, it gives me everything that I am looking for a TV for 2022, especially when it comes to blacks, when it comes to shadow detail. Yes, you'll get occasional blooming. Yes, you'll get occasional lifted blacks when it comes to black bars, and that has already been mentioned. But when it comes to shadow detail, when it comes to color reproduction, when it comes to the gaming features that I play with, when it comes to this TV, the X95K should be on your list if you're looking for a bigger TV in this category. Now, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What you guys think of the review of the Sony X95K. Do you think about buying this TV by looking at this review? Do you think about a different TV? Let me know in the comments. But once again, just want to say thank you everyone for watching this video. Until next time, I'll see everyone on the next one. Take care.